Welcome to Funding Bravely, a podcast about courage and philanthropy, what it looks like, how we find it, and how we grow it in its many forms. I'm your host, Marvin Smith. This episode is part of our donor-advised fund mini-series, DAFs at a Crossroads, moving money at the speed of need. 6 episodes asking what it would take to move the resources already committed to good faster, more flexibly, and in deeper partnership with the communities most affected by how that capital moves or doesn't move, a shift this field is still learning to make. More than $330 billion is sitting in donor-advised funds right now. The question of this series is whether we'll have the courage to move it. If this season is asking about whether donor-advised funds can rise to meet this moment, we have to start with someone who's actually been inside the rooms where the infrastructure of philanthropic finance gets designed. That's where my guest today has spent her career. I'm really excited to welcome Magda Guillen to Funding Bravely. Magda brings more than 15 years of experience across private equity, venture capital, and philanthropy to this conversation. She's worked with platforms like CataCap and Realize Impact to advance catalytic capital deployment, and she previously led innovation at Vanguard Charitable, one of the largest donor-advised fund sponsors in the country, where she shaped new product development and launched next-gen DAF solutions. Today, she carries all of that into her work at La Familia Fund. The first time we sat down together, Magda named the misalignment between how philanthropic capital is structured to move and how it actually needs to move with a precision that helps to have come from building the architecture from the inside. And at a moment when more than $330 billion is parked in donor-advised funds and growing, that kind of clarity is exactly what this field needs more of. Importantly, though, with community-centered principles and courage at the center. Magda, welcome. I'm so grateful you're here today.
Thanks for having me, Marvin. I'm excited for our conversation.
Well, I want to start not by asking you about DAFs or courage. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and I just want to ask you, what's keeping you grounded or even laughing, finding joy lately?
Well, I have to answer that question with thoughts to my 2 boys. I've got 2 young kids, 7 and 12. They're turning 8 and 13 in 2 weeks, and they are a perpetual source of chaos in my life, but also joy. Just last week, we welcomed 14 of my son's best friends over for a sleepover. So I had 14, 12 and 13-year-old boys in my backyard. And
14?
Yeah, 14.
Oh, my goodness.
14, yeah. My neighbors thought I was crazy, and they could all hear them late into the night. It was all really fun. I loved their energy. I didn't love the tater tot food fight that ensued. But other than that, it was a great night.
Yeah, that might be a Mom of the Year award for you right there. That's got to keep you grounded, if not anything else.
That's right.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Well, Magda, I want to just transition us into what our listeners came here to learn more about, just your leadership path, your work with donor-advised funds. And, this series is really centering in on courage and why it's a difference maker. And I'd love for you to share maybe one of your earliest experiences with courage in your personal life. Where was it first cultivated in you, and what do you think shaped it?
Well, I would like to think that there's been a lot of moments where I've shown courage in my life trajectory, but I think one of my strongest memories is leaving the nest. And I think this is probably a story that resonates with a lot of people. I grew up in an incredibly small rural town in the South Texas, along the border with Mexico. My extent of travel as a young person was pretty limited to Texas and northern Mexico visiting family. But I had in my heart this desire to move away from Texas and elsewhere for my education. So I applied all to East Coast schools that didn't even have a school in Texas that I applied to. And eventually I got, I was accepted at Harvard. And I remember very distinctly my parents going to the travel agent and buying tickets for this flight to Boston where they'd never been and I'd never been. And we packed our bags and And we spent the weekend getting myself situated in my dorm in the middle of Harvard Square. And there was just this moment on the street corner where they said their goodbyes. And my dad said a little prayer for me. And then, they described me just being swallowed up in this sea of people as I made my way back to my dorm room in the evening. And that was it. It was just a moment of real separation and my life sort of unrolling and raveling in front of me in the most positive of ways. And it was just it was a physical step forward, but it was also a metaphorical step forward. And I remember feeling courage coursing through my veins in that moment. And I think that's propelled me ever since.
What a huge transition. What do you feel like kept you grounded? We started talking a little bit about grounding when I asked what was bringing you joy lately. What do you feel like was helpful to keep you grounded after you made that move, that physical transition when times did get tough?
I think it was a really strong identity of who I was and why I was there and what I was representing and the voice that I wanted to bring to the table. I didn't necessarily have a great in-depth understanding of the people that were around me, their situation having grown up and their life path up until that point. But I certainly knew who I was, and I knew what my values were. I knew the work ethic of living in a quiet rural community, very farm oriented, growing up on a farm and working with animals and going with my dad to the livestock sale on the weekends. This was my reality, and I felt like I had an important voice to share because it wasn't something that a lot of people around me had experienced.
Yeah, really powerful life lessons there. I think there's a saying I heard once of when you're feeling lost, come back home. And when you talk about that grounding, knowing where you come from feels so helpful in those moments when you're finding yourself in some kind of struggle, whether a transition to school or something challenging on the work front where you kind of have to you feel and hear yourself swallow, and you got to make a really difficult choice when there's a lot on the line. And I've often find in knowing where I've come from and reflecting on that gives me some strength. And it sounds like that's some of what you really relied on in moving to a place like Harvard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a saying, you can take a girl out of Texas, but you can't take Texas out of a girl.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much true for me even today.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing how that might come to life from my daughter who's 6 and a native born Tejana. I don't know if she knows it that much since we moved not too long after she was born, but I'm going to hold on to that one.
You should.
Yeah. Well, I want to fast forward from here just a little bit into your career journey and getting into some of what your leadership has looked like in some of these pivotal moments. So you've spent your career inside the architecture of philanthropic finance. I mean, Vanguard Charitable is a behemoth, Catacap, Realize Impact, and now launching something on your own, La Familia Fund, who I know you do that in partnership with a co-founder. Walk me through some of that arc. Like, what did being inside those systems teach you, and teach you how this capital actually moves and maybe what it could do differently?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share about that. And, even taking a step back further in time, if there's been a through line in the jobs that I have chosen or the jobs that have chosen me over my career, I've always been drawn to this idea of using financial instruments to impact social issues and social needs. And that's even going back to my days at Merrill Lynch when I was working in the structured finance space. I was the first research analyst that was covering Latin American markets. And when I set foot into these countries and I saw what was happening in the mortgage and consumer credit space, I saw potential, and I also saw many hazards. And of course, we all know where that story played out. And I think that was the first step in this journey of understanding that financial instruments look like infrastructure. They look like procedures on a piece of paper. But at the end of the day, there are people in each of those nodes, and they're impacted very directly by what those financial instruments do and what they don't do, the behaviors that they encourage and the behaviors that they discourage, and then at an aggregate, how markets move in response to what those financial instruments are incentivizing or not incentivizing. But I still remain optimistic about it. I mean, that's what drew me to go work for a donor advised fund in the first place. I'd come from a more traditional financial services background. And after a move abroad, living in Central America for a couple of years, I came back to the U.S. and I was really looking for an opportunity that would allow me to marry my financial expertise with impact. And I didn't quite know what that would be or what it would mean. And I started looking around at the landscape. I thought, CDFIs, impact investing, what is this? And then I heard about donor advised funds. We'd moved to the Philadelphia area, and there happens to be a couple large donor advised fund sponsors in the area. And the more I started to unpeel the layers of this onion, what is a DAF? I just saw opportunity. I saw an instrument that, again, could be used for social benefit if it was in the right hands and with the right incentive structures in it. So that's what drew me ultimately to donor advised funds, and I remain so optimistic about how they can be used going forward.
Yeah. So you saw a vehicle to move money toward communities, however flawed, an opportunity to use it for good. It sounds like is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, no, used for good and also untapped potential within it. I think it's been a pretty static instrument since it became more broadly adopted in the last 25, 30 years. But with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of bravery, that it could actually be used to inspire more impactful giving and more scaled giving.
Where did that desire to want to bring some creativity to make use of this giving vehicle differently than was really set up to deliver on in a lot of ways?
That's a good question. Where did it come from? I think it was just the untapped potential seeing these billions of dollars that have been that everyone always references about sitting in donor advised fund accounts largely dormant. That's capital that's been earmarked for charitable purposes. It's irrevocable gifts to charity. It's sitting there. How do we unlock and activate that capital in a way that is not only faster, getting to these mission critical organizations faster, but more intentionally, and in a way that the donor himself is feeling more satisfaction and ownership for the outcome. We don't talk about ROIs in philanthropy very much. The sector has been really reluctant to bring that sort of lens to it. But when
they do talk about ROI with grantees, though. That's something that's more comfortable.
Right. That it is true. It is true. And I think that's been, I would say, if there's been one shift in our collective understanding of how philanthropy should work, is this metric driven, ROI driven lens that we bring, which, I mean, that's a whole other episode. I think there's a lot of good and bad that's come from that for the philanthropy world. But donors themselves don't think about their own portfolio of giving. They don't think about their charitable basket as being a portfolio of values that they're expressing through their charitable dollars. And that was, something that I thought would not only give donors more ownership of outcomes, but more satisfaction and ultimately, hopefully, more activity, more velocity in their giving.
Yeah. What does it cost you personally and kind of professionally, emotionally, and naming these opportunities to apply DAFs and, the opportunity behind DAFs in a different way that's more powerful in your sector that, has moved more traditionally in the past? Like, to keep telling the truth about how philanthropic capital is or isn't reaching the people who need it, what opportunities are to think differently and the application of DAFs. What does that look like at a personal level?
I think it can look like, on good days, it can look like opening up new possibilities for the sector. And it can look like being a gate breaker and someone who's willing to question the norms, which I hope I'm doing, and is a source or an example of bringing courage to the work. On bad days, it can feel like hitting your head against a brick wall and feeling like there is a lot of entrenched motivations for the way things are today, and there are many reasons why those beliefs are entrenched, and so you sort of feel like you are the proverbial turning around the ship. It is an incredible amount of work, but this work is generational. I think we're getting so much better at how we think about philanthropy, about how we think about impact. If you think of the field even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we've advanced so much. So it's important to ground oneself in an understanding that we're all making incremental progress forward, and the field is getting better and responding.
Okay, I'm going to sit here a little bit more and ask you at an even more personal level, when you think about what it takes to do this work the way that you are doing. Maybe if could you think of an example where maybe you are bringing a different kind of approach in your work at Vanguard than maybe how you've done it in previous years? You lent your voice, your credibility, your influence to the room. What was going on inside you in that moment, and what does it take for other professionals, let's say, who want to bring some more courage and different way of thinking to DAFs and how we're making use of them than is the case in many situations now? What might they learn from? I'm curious what they might learn from the approach that you've taken in one of those situations.
I think one of my gifts is I'm able to paint a picture of something that doesn't exist yet, and bring people into the narrative of what the possibilities are. And I used that storytelling gift to enlighten colleagues, partners in the space, to just understanding the opportunities that were in front of us. In particular, thinking about ways that we could utilize the ever improving picture of nonprofit data that has been improving over time and is now superpowered in the age of AI. There was a particular moment. It was actually at the beginning of the COVID pandemic where we as an organization at Vanguard Charitable were thinking about how to respond, how to make the donor advised fund lean into the moment and support our donors in ways that mattered. And there were many ideas around the table, but at the end of the day, we wanted to solve a pretty simple problem that we heard our donors asking for, which is, help me find the organizations. Who are the frontline organizations right now that are distributing PPE or getting food to the hungry or providing transport or medical support? And we looked around, and turns out we couldn't find that. As simple as it sounds, we couldn't find a repository or a database that would link donors with a particular kind of help that they were trying to support and the specific communities in which they were in. So we took that insight and pretty quickly spun up a totally new donor advised fund tool. We called it the Nonprofit Aid Visualizer, or NAVI. And it was a map of all of the zip codes in the United States where you could zero in right down to your city block and find nonprofits that were actively responding to the COVID pandemic. And again, we would have happily provided this resource to donors in that moment of crisis if it had existed, but it didn't exist before. And that was several years ago. That was at the start of the pandemic. I can only imagine now all the different use cases where we could bring that data into donors' hands and put them more in the driver's seat of deciding where to send their support.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example. It's making me think about infrastructure and how we define it. It's such a hot topic right now in philanthropy and in the nonprofit world. And when we talk about DAFs and finance, we're often thinking about a much different kind of infrastructure. I'm hearing the importance of storytelling as an infrastructure to move folks toward, a future that they haven't seen yet. Painting a picture for them, I think is how you referred to it, of something that they haven't seen yet or you haven't seen yet, but knowing that there's a different kind of future possible in the way that you're working with donor advised funds, and how important narrative is, not just for the impact that we want to have, but externally and in the world and in communities, but internally inside organizations, in moving people who have their own lived experience and sense of priorities and approach. So I just want to call that out. And the second kind of infrastructure is relationships. So understanding who's doing that real work on the ground that you want to support when donors are interested in bringing their assets in a positive way towards certain causes they're passionate about and can't find resources to help them identify organizations or through
Sure.
Vanguard. And
That's
so,
right.
yeah,
No, that's right. I think that the narrative piece is crucial, but the data piece increasingly is how you scale that, right? Because stories pass from person to person. The way you can create a whole platform is by utilizing data to surface those stories more quickly and more intentionally to the right audience, right? It doesn't accomplish anything to shout your narrative from the top of the Empire State Building if you're not reaching the right people. It's about building that bridge to donors who care about your story and doing it in a very intentional and scale forward way.
that's right. It really does take a skilled combination of both, right? I agree with you. Um, what do you think one of the most important things donors don't yet understand about what community proximity actually requires?
Um, I think donors are starting to understand the importance of community proximity. I think that there's a new, especially as you look at the giving habits of younger generations of donors. We've moved beyond a paternalistic. My point of view is what I should imprint on the world. That no one thinks about that. We're learning about the importance of working from the ground up to understand what a community needs and how they're best served. What donors might not appreciate is how you uncover those stories in a way that feels like a partnership and not like a power struggle, because there is always going to be a power dynamic between the individuals and groups that have the dollars available for philanthropic giving and the organizations that need them. So it's that transfer of power, it's that power sharing with the community that is very easy to talk about, but I think a lot harder to do without causing a lot of extra work on behalf of the donor. And I think everybody loves the idea of participatory grant making and power sharing, but there's a commitment of time from the community and the commitment of time from the donor as well in order to actualize that. And not all donors have that time. Many of them have the intention, but they don't all have the time. So it's about finding trusted partners in the community and trusted partners with your own philanthropic advisory partnership, and whatever that might look like. That could be a set of professional advisors. It could be working with your donor advised fund sponsor, or it could just simply be your round table with your spouse and your children and your grandchildren, talking about how you power share effectively. But there is a commitment of time and effort and thought that needs to happen in order for it to actually happen on the ground.
You said something earlier I want to ask you a bit more about around this not seeing as many donors nowadays who want to, it sounds like, and I'm very loosely paraphrasing here, who want to bring their own agenda and approach and force it on a community, who believe in communities kind of naming more of what they'd like to see present, and a future that looks different, how resources are donated, the importance of being proximate to communities, that there's some kind of progression we're seeing in the sector in the midst of this transfer of wealth to a next generation of donors that looks to be a little bit more community centered or progressive from your experience? Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Well, I can speak anecdotally to what I have observed and what I've seen. But when my partner and I decided to build the infrastructure for Familia Fund, which is a DAF powered venture capital fund for investing in underrepresented founders, that question was actually at the core of what we were trying to solve for as we thought about our infrastructure for the fund. And so we built that in a way that I think is not only built intentionally for power sharing at the outset, but is designed for long-term longevity power sharing, right? Where you're actually shifting that sovereignty of wealth into the community it's meant to serve over the long term. But crucially, you need to find partners, you need to find funders that are aligned with that understand that vision, and that are willing to take the long-term bet, because you're not going to see in 12 months whether your bet paid off. It's really about 12 years from now, right? When we have set out to build this catalytic capital engine, is it going to work? We won't know right away. So in our discussions with with funders, it really is this two-way conversation. What are we aiming to create? What are they willing to support, and what's their timeline? And how comfortable are they with the power sharing that's going to be required to make the system work?
Yeah. So it sounds like you're working with funders who want to see decisions around how their wealth is moved and to whom, done differently.
That's the hope. That's what we're trying to find, and I think there are the folks that we're speaking to are receptive to it, but it's untested. We haven't seen a model like this really emerge, and so it's really going to require brave funders who can look at myself, my partner, see the vision, right? That storytelling of the future that could exist, and believe in us that we're the ones that can actually go and test this out, experiment with it. Really, ultimately, philanthropic capital is exactly that. It's solving problems that the market would never solve on its own, but for this capital and being willing to take those long-term risky bets.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing again an example of painting a picture of what could be in the future that we don't know yet exactly, if it'll unfold in this way or not, but not being beholden into the ways of the past, that I think is really powerful for this moment. People talk a lot about philanthropic capital as risk capital. Where does the infusion of the venture capital funding sources come into play for you all? Why think about it with a VC approach?
That's a great question, and I think it really stems from a deep-rooted belief that I share with my co-GP, that entrepreneurship is the path for long-term generational wealth building in this country. And I look around at the universe of founders that have historically been invisible to the venture capital industry, and I see a work ethic. I see a commitment to excellence. I see a doggedness in what they produce that is an ethos that I just think is absolutely essential to lift these communities into the next century. And so I think the venture capital lens, that ethic, that energy, is something that philanthropy could absolutely learn a lesson from. I think there's often this idea that patient capital means that you should be patient about outcomes, but patient capital with an impatient mindset, I think, is the most powerful mix of all. And so Familia Fund is that, long-term, risk-loving philanthropic capital, but with an energy and burning desire to see change today and to scale it as quickly and as sustainably as possible.
So let me ask you from there, if we got this right, Familia Fund is successful in its mission and what it aims to accomplish. and DAF capital actually moved with the urgency that this moment requires, what would it change for the communities most affected by whether it moves or not? And that you're working with and for those underrepresented founders.
So there's two pieces to that answer. The first is embedded in the structure of Familia Fund itself. Familia Fund is really built around a donor advised fund that is owned by the community and partnered directly with the venture fund. So its outcomes, its returns, its positive outcomes are all captured in a closed system. So we have an initial infusion of capital that's coming from philanthropists outside of our community, within our community, but all dedicated to this mission of lifting up this next generation of underrepresented founders. It gets funneled into a donor advised fund account that's twinned with the venture capital fund. And as those returns from those investments are captured, they get recycled infinitely into not just one generation of founders, but many to come. I think there's this limiting belief in philanthropy that grants are one and done. You go out and you support a program, you support a nonprofit, and that's the end of it. At the end of the year, at the end of the program, the organization is right back to square one and having to fundraise all over again. So we've intentionally built this infrastructure, which once it gets ignited with that initial infusion of capital, should be self-sustaining over the long term. So an almost endowment-like approach. And importantly, the sovereignty of that donor advised fund stays with the community. So it's twinned with community outcomes in that way. But it's also the scale, right? We are dreaming big. We're raising a $5 million pilot fund to test that these pipes work in the way that we expect them to, but we hope to raise much more. And venture capital has been an incredible locus of wealth creation. I mean, you and I can both sit here and name some venture capital-backed companies that have changed the world seemingly overnight and have created, billions for their founders. But that is such a small universe of people, right? How do we bring more people into contact with these generational wealth building opportunities? We need to find a way that more founders can receive the startup capital that they need to prove out whether their idea will be scalable at that level or not. Venture capital has no incentive to do that, right? They pick a few winners. It's concentrated in the small number of mega funds that are reaping the returns and a small number of founders. They have no incentive to democratize or open up the top of the funnel for new entrepreneurs. Philanthropic capital is playing by a different set of rules. And we think with this infrastructure, we actually have the mechanics to make that happen.
Thank you very much for that. So I want to invite you just to share a closing thought about the courage that you think is critical for us to see to really capitalize on this opportunity for donor advised funds to move and help get us to a much different place. Just share with our listeners here, where would you like to see that courage show up if you think out into the future?
Well, in a lot of different spaces and ways, but I think just food for thought, right, for listeners is around what the U.S. tax code is incentivizing with donor advised funds. Since the beginning of our tax system, our modern tax system in the United States, there's always been an implicit bargain, right? Private capital can receive public benefit when it serves the public good. And DAFs are part of that story. DAFs fit into that tradition. And in many ways that has worked. I firmly believe that but for the existence of donor advised funds, we would have a lot less charitable capital in the system today. DAFs have unleashed an entire new category of capital available for public good. But the bargain really is only complete when the donor advised fund dollars that are sitting in those accounts actually make it out to the communities that need them. Right now, that capital, the tax benefit is immediate for that capital, but the community benefit can be delayed, and there's a misalignment. When that's happened in other entities, taxable entities or taxable structures in the past, there has been reform. All right. If you think about the payout rate for private foundations, if you think about 401k, there have been reforms that have happened at the tax code level in order to facilitate more of those dollars going to where they were ultimately intended to. That hasn't yet happened with DAFs, and it may or may not happen in our lifetimes. But I think there are many things that we can be doing with DAFs today to make that happen more quickly, and in the absence of any changes to the tax code. So I feel a lot of courage in the moment. I feel a lot of courage in the importance of what we're trying to accomplish when we say we want to tap into DAF capital. And I think that this moment demands it, right? Nonprofits are really struggling right now with a lot of federal funding that has dried up. So we need to be extraordinarily creative and try to unleash that capital as much as possible.
Well, thank you so much, Magda, for your participation as part of this mini-series, DAFs at a Crossroads, moving money at the speed of need. There's so much more we could talk about on policy reforms. I've got to make some room for another episode to cover these opportunities here. But thank you for bringing your personal story of courage, of leadership in the sector at a time we most need it. Please share with your listeners where we can find more about your work.
Great question. We're always posting on LinkedIn, so you can follow me there. My co-GP, Cheryl Campos, as well. We have our website, familiafund.bc, where you can read all about what we're trying to build.
This is great. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today, and keep moving courageously.
Thanks, Marvin.